For the survivors of the beach, the battle ended at 1 p.m. on August 19th. But the war was far from over. Nearly 2,000 Canadians were marched into captivity. They were the men of Dieppe. For 3 long years, they existed in the twilight world of the Stalags. Stalag 8B, Lambsdorff, a place of barbed wire, turnip soup, and boredom. They were shackled, they were starved, but they were not broken. The Dieppe prisoners became legendary for their resistance. They dug tunnels, they sabotaged work details. They traded cigarettes for radio parts to listen to the BBC. They held on to the hope that one day the tables would turn. That day finally came in 1945. But it came with a final test. As the Soviet Red Army smashed through Poland, the Germans panicked. They emptied the POW camps. They forced the prisoners to march west, away from the liberators. The Death March in the dead of winter, 1945. For months, the men of Dieppe marched across Germany. They slept in barns, in ditches. In the snow, they ate frozen potatoes they dug from the fields. Those who fell out of line were shot. Those who couldn't walk were left behind. It was a test of endurance that stripped a man down to his very core. But they kept each other alive. They carried their wounded. They shared their last crusts of bread because they were a regiment. Liberation, when it came, was a blur of chocolate, cigarettes, and tears. But the return home was not the fairy tale they expected. They brought the war home with them. In 1946, there was no word for PTSD. They called it battle exhaustion, or nerves. Men who had survived the beach and the camps found themselves waking up screaming in the night. They couldn't hold down jobs. They drank to drown the sound of the MG-42s. For decades, the Dieppe veterans were a unique brotherhood. They were the men who had seen the worst of it. They were often looked down upon by those who fought in the successful campaigns. They were the reminders of failure. But among themselves, they knew the truth. They knew the price they had paid. In their twilight years, many returned to France. They walked on the chert beaches. They touched the concrete of the bunkers that had once tried to kill them. They found a town that honored them as heroes. To the people of Dieppe, the Canadians were not failures. They were the first light of freedom. The first signal that the world had not forgotten them. The story of Dieppe is a tragedy, yes, but it is also a story of resilience, of young men who walked into fire because they were asked to, of a nation that learned the hard way what it means to be a global power. The fatal mistake was made by the commanders. The glory belongs entirely to the men. They are the ghosts of the Pebble Beach, and as long as we remember them, they are not lost. March 27th. The Atlantic is not kind to the little ships. The wooden motor launches are tossing like corks in a washing machine. For the commandos, the journey is an ordeal of endurance. They are soaked to the bone, freezing, violently seasick. But they cannot rest. They check their timers. They waterproof their fuses. They are professionals headed to a funeral, and they want to be on time. 2 hours. A pinpoint of light appears in the black water. It is the submarine HMS Sturgeon. For hours, she has been waiting on the surface, risking detection, to act as a lighthouse. She marks the entrance to the Loire estuary. Navigation is critical. If they miss the channel entrance by even a few hundred yards, they will run aground on the mudflats. They will be stuck. Sitting ducks for the German coastal artillery when the sun rises. Commander Beatty, the captain of the Campbeltown, takes the helm. He steers the destroyer into the mouth of the river. The trap is set. They are now inside the lion's throat. 01:00 hours. The flotilla enters the river. The water here is calm, eerily calm. On both sides of the river, the dark shapes of the French coastline loom. They are gliding past 80 heavy guns, past radar stations, past thousands of eyes. This is where the disguise is tested. The Campbeltown is flying the Nazi battle flag. Her funnels are cut to mimic a German destroyer. The commandos on deck are hiding below the gunwales. To a sleepy German sentry looking through binoculars, she looks like a friendly ship returning home for repairs. Or so they hope. They creep forward. 10 knots, 12 knots. The dry dock is still 3 miles away. Every second of silence is a miracle. Every minute without a gunshot is a gift. 01:22 hours. The miracle runs out. A searchlight on the north bank snaps on. Then another, then a third. The Campbeltown is bathed in blinding white light. There is no hiding now. A warning shot is fired. A tracer shell arcs over the ship. This is the moment where most commanders would panic, where they would open fire. But on the bridge of the Campbeltown, there is a man named Leading Signalman Pike, and he has a secret weapon, a captured German code book. The Germans demand identification. Pike flashes back. He signals, "Wait, Urgent operations. 2 damaged ships requesting priority docking. It is a brazen lie, but it buys them time. The German gunners hesitate. Is it one of theirs? If they fire on a friendly ship, they will be court-martialed. Confusion is the ally of the bold. The Campbeltown pushes forward, 1 mile closer. Pike signals again. Generator trouble. Speeding to dock. But the ruse can only last so long. The ship is accelerating. She is now doing 18 knots. Too fast for a docking procedure. The German commander on the shore realizes the truth. The order is screamed. Open fire! The night is torn apart. 80 guns open up simultaneously. 20mm cannons, 37mm flak, 88er heavy artillery. The Campbeltown is hammered. Shells tear through the thin hull, bullets rake the deck. Men are cut down where they stand. But the deception is over. On the bridge, Commander Beatty gives the order. Hoist the battle ensign. The swastika comes down. The white ensign goes up. It is a moment of pure defiant theater. They are telling the Germans exactly who has come to kill them. The ship is a burning wreck. The steering is damaged. The casualties are mounting. But she is still moving. And the target is dead ahead, the dry dock gate. A massive wall of steel and concrete. Beatty aims the bow directly at the center. He does not slow down. He speeds up. This is the moment of truth. 4 tons of explosives, 18 knots of speed. One chance, 134 hours impact. The HMS Campbeltown does not just hit the dock gate. She mounts it. Driven by the momentum of 18 knots and thousands of tons of steel, the destroyer rides up over the caisson like a car hitting a ramp. She crashes down, her bow wedged firmly 33 feet onto the dock gate. She is stuck, immovable. A steel dagger driven into the heart of the German port. On the bridge, Commander Beatty checks his watch. 1:34 a.m. They are 4 minutes late, but they are exactly where they need to be. Deep inside the ship, in the concrete tomb of the bow, the acid vials in the pencil fuses have shattered. The acid begins to eat through the copper wire. Tick, tick. Tick, the countdown to the apocalypse has begun. But for the commandos on deck, there is no time to wait for the explosion. They have work to do. As the ship settles, the assault teams of No. 2 Commando pour over the sides. They are carrying rucksacks filled with Composition B explosives, sledgehammers, incendiary devices. They are running directly into a wall of machine gun fire. The German defenders on the dockside are stunned. They have never seen anything like this. A destroyer has just parked in their living room, and madmen in wool caps are jumping off it. The initial shock gives the British a fleeting advantage. The commandos split into demolition teams. Each team has a specific target and a specific deadline. Lieutenant Chant's team is tasked with the pump house. This is the beating heart of the dry dock. The massive pumps that drain the water to let a battleship enter. Chant is wounded in the legs before he even gets off the ship. But adrenaline is a powerful drug. He hobbles to the pump house. His men kick open the doors. They repel the German guards with grenades. And they go to work. It is precision work done in the middle of a hurricane. They place the charges on the impellers. On the drive shafts, they set the timers. And they run. Boom. The bottom of the pump house blows out. The machinery drops 2 stories into the bedrock. Objective 1, destroyed. Further down the dock, Lieutenant Smalley's team hits the winding sheds. These are the engines that pull the massive gate open. They blow them sky high. In less than 20 minutes, the infrastructure of the St. Nazaire Dry Dock is being systematically dismantled. It is a masterclass in sabotage. But while the commandos on the dock are winning, on the river a tragedy is unfolding. The plan called for the Campbeltown to take the brunt of the fire. But the Germans have too many guns. Once the destroyer hits the gate, the coastal batteries turn their attention to the flotilla. The little ships, remember these boats are made of mahogany and plywood. They are carrying extra fuel tanks on their decks to make the long journey home. They are essentially floating petrol bombs. One by one they are picked off. It is a turkey shoot. A German shell hits the fuel tank of ML-192. The boat vaporizes in a ball of orange fire. Burning petrol spreads across the surface of the river. The water itself catches fire. Men jumping from burning boats land in burning water. The river becomes an inferno. Commandos who are supposed to land and support the demolition teams never make it to the shore. They burn or they drown. Of the 16 motor launches that entered the river, only a handful managed to land their troops. The rest are disintegrated. The extraction plan relied on these boats. They were the taxi service home. Beatty and Newman stand on the dock. They look back at the river. They see the flames. They see the debris. And they realize the terrifying truth. The taxis are gone. Colonel Newman gathers the survivors. There are about 100 of them. wounded, low on ammunition, trapped in the middle of a German fortress. Behind them is the Atlantic Ocean. In front of them is the entire German army. Neumann makes a decision that cements his legend. He does not surrender. He does not hide. He issues a new order. All the boats are destroyed. We will fight our way through the town. We will get into the open country. We will walk to Spain. It is an insane order. Spain is hundreds of miles away. But it gives the men a purpose. It turns a massacre into a breakout. And so begins the Second Battle of St. Nazaire, the street fight. The commandos move like ghosts through the warehouses. They are fighting not just soldiers, but armored cars. Sergeant Durant, manning a Lewis gun on one of the few surviving boats, stays behind to provide covering fire. He is shot 16 times. He keeps firing. He silences the German guns on the pier so his comrades can move. He will later be awarded the Victoria Cross posthumously. The Germans are stunned by the ferocity of the British. They assume this must be a full-scale invasion. They divert troops from the countryside. But the commandos are running out of bullets. They are cornered in the winding streets. They fight with pistols, with knives. With fists, one by one, the pockets of resistance are silenced. Colonel Neumann is captured. Commander Beatty is captured. By dawn, the shooting stops. The sun rises on a scene of devastation. The raid appears to be over. The Germans have won. They have captured the British commanders. They have killed or captured almost the entire raiding force. The dry dock gate is damaged, yes, by the collision. But the ship is just a wreck, a trophy. Hundreds of German soldiers swarm onto the Campbeltown, sightseers. Officers bring their mistresses to take photos in front of the great British failure. They set up a headquarters on the dockside, right next to the bow. They are standing on top of 4 tons of amytal. They do not know. They do not know that the fuse was set for 11 a.m. But the acid is cold. The Atlantic water lowered the temperature inside the hull. The chemical reaction has slowed down. 11 a.m. passes, nothing happens. Noon passes. The Germans relax completely. They believe the explosives, if there were any, were duds. They begin to interrogate Commander Beatty. The German intelligence officer mocks Beatty. You British are fools. You sacrifice all these men for nothing. The damage is minimal. Beatty says nothing. He just waits. 10:30 am, 11:30 am. The delay is agonizing, but physics is inevitable. Inside the pencil fuse, the last atom of copper dissolves. The striker hits the primer, and then the world ends. The shockwave is felt for miles. In the interrogation room, the windows are blown inward. Glass flies across the room like shrapnel. The German intelligence officer is thrown to the ground. Commander Beatty, shaken but unharmed, stands up. He brushes the dust off his uniform. He looks down at the terrified German officer. I think that is the proof you were looking for. Outside, the scene is apocalyptic. The Campbeltown is gone. The front half of the destroyer has simply ceased to exist. The massive caisson gate, the steel wall that held back the Atlantic Ocean, has been pulverized. A tidal wave of river water rushes into the dry dock. It picks up the 2 German tankers undergoing repairs inside and smashes them against the walls. The 400 German soldiers who were on board the Campbeltown, the sightseers, the souvenir hunters, they are vaporized instantly. In a single millisecond, the heart of the St. Nazaire dockyards is ripped out. But the nightmare for the Germans is not over. Panic sets in. The German garrison is leaderless, confused, and terrified. They believe the British commandos are still hiding in the town. They start shooting at shadows. They shoot at French civilians. In the chaos, they even start shooting at each other. And then, the British play their final card, the ghost torpedoes. During the raid, a small motor launch, ML-306, had fired delayed-action torpedoes into the outer lock gates. They were set with ultra-long delay fuses. For 2 days they sat in the mud, silent, unnoticed, while the Germans were cleaning up the bodies from the Campbeltown explosion. The torpedoes detonate Monday, noon, just as the panic was subsiding. The outer gates are blown apart. The German garrison goes into full hysteria. They are convinced that invisible commandos are still sabotaging the port. They lock down the city. They fire wildly into the ruins. Hundreds of German soldiers are killed in friendly fire incidents in the days that follow. A handful of British sailors and commandos, dead or captured, had managed to psychologically break an entire German division. But what of the men? Most were captured, many were dead, but 5 men, 5 determined souls, actually did it. They walked to Spain, Corporal Douglas, Corporal Wheeler, and 3 others. They slipped out of the burning town. They evaded patrols. They begged for food from French farmhouses. They traveled by night and hid by day. They crossed the Pyrenees Mountains on foot. It took them weeks. But they returned to England to tell the tale. They proved that Colonel Newman's insane order, walk to Spain, was not impossible. It was just incredibly difficult. The cost was astronomical. Of the 612 men who entered the river, 169 were killed, were captured. Only 228 returned to England. It was a casualty rate of over 60%. But the bravery displayed that night was so undeniable that even the Germans were impressed. 5 Victoria Crosses, the highest award for valor, were awarded for the raid. Colonel Newman and Commander Beatty received theirs. Sergeant Durrant received his posthumously on the recommendation of a German officer who witnessed his last stand. It remains one of the most decorated actions in British military history. But the real question remains, was it worth it? Was the sacrifice of the Campbeltown and her crew worth the cost? The answer is a resounding yes. The dry dock at St. Nazaire was completely destroyed. The damage was so catastrophic that the Germans never repaired it. It remained a ruin until 1950, long after the war was over. And the beast? The battleship Tirpitz never entered the Atlantic. Without a safe harbor to retreat to, the risk was too high. She spent the rest of the war hiding in Norway, a fleet in being, a prisoner of her own size. She was eventually sunk by heavy bombers in 1944, having never fired her main guns at an Atlantic convoy. Because of the men who rammed a destroyer into a gate, thousands of merchant ships crossed the ocean safely. Millions of tons of supplies reached Britain. The lifeline was preserved. Operation Chariot was a suicide mission in everything but name. It was a plan that should not have worked, relied on a disguise that should have failed, and explosives that should have been detected. But it succeeded because of the sheer bloody-minded audacity of the men who executed it. They wrote the definition of the word commando. They proved that no fortress is impregnable, and they left the German Navy with a lesson they would never forget. When the British have their backs to the wall, they don't just defend, they attack. 0230 hours, March 28th. The dockyard battle is effectively over, but the battle for the town is just beginning. The surviving commandos are now scattered. They are cut off from the river. They are cut off from England. They are operating in small groups, pairs, trios, moving through a labyrinth of hostile streets, and they are about to trigger a tragedy that the planners never fully anticipated. To the French civilians of St. Nazaire, the explosions at the dry dock sound like salvation. For 2 years, they have lived under the jackboot of the occupation. They hear the British grenades. They see the British helmets, and they make a fatal assumption. They think this is the invasion. They believe the liberation of France has begun, so they rise up. Ordinary men and women grab hunting rifles, old pistols, and kitchen knives. They pour into the streets to help the commandos. They ambush German patrols. They offer hiding places to the wounded British soldiers. But the British have to deliver the crushing news. We are not staying. You have to hide. It is a heartbreaking moment. The commandos know that by accepting help, they are signing the death warrants of these civilians. But in the chaos, the lines blur. The German response is swift and brutal. Paranoid and terrified by the ghost torpedoes and the invisible enemy, the Wehrmacht declares the town a combat zone. They stop distinguishing between commandos and civilians. If you are on the street, you are a target. Meanwhile, the escape begins. Colonel Newman's order to walk to Spain was not a metaphor. But getting out of St. Nazaire requires passing through a ring of steel. The Germans have set up roadblocks on every bridge and every exit road. Most of the commandos are captured within miles of the port. They are exhausted. They have no food. Their ammunition is gone, but one group, the Impossibles, finds a way. Corporal Wheeler, Corporal Douglas, and 3 others. They realize that looking like a soldier is a death sentence, so they improvise. They ditch their heavy gear. They steal clothes from clotheslines. They become drifters. They rely on the shadow army, the French resistance. Although the raid was a surprise to them, the resistance networks spring into action to save the stragglers. They pass the men from safe house to safe house, barn cellars, attics. This is the untold story of St. Nazaire. The raid was loud, explosive. The escape is silent, intimate. It is a story of shared risk. If the Germans find these men in a farmhouse, the entire family will be executed. Yet, the French feed them. They give them maps. They guide them through the forests. They bluff their way onto trains. They use forged papers that are barely dry. They sit inches away from German officers, praying that their silence isn't mistaken for suspicion. They travel through a country that is effectively a prison. And finally, the mountains. the natural fortress between occupied France and neutral Spain. They have no climbing gear. They have worn-out boots. They are malnourished, but they climb. When they finally cross the border, when they walk into the British consulate in Barcelona, the staff does not believe them. They are ghosts. Men who walked out of the mouth of hell and crossed a continent. Their return provides the British Admiralty with the first eyewitness accounts of the destruction. They confirm the dock is dead. But back in the town, the price is being paid. The Germans are furious about the civilian uprising. They threaten mass executions. They round up hostages. The British government is forced to issue a statement on the BBC, begging the French civilians to stand down. Do not rise up yet. The time is not now. Wait for the signal. Hundreds of French civilians died during and after the raid. Collateral damage in the war against the Tirpitz. Their sacrifice is often overshadowed by the spectacular explosion of the destroyer. But without their confusion and their courage, the few British survivors who made it home would likely have perished in the mud of the Loire. The raid was a partnership forged in fire. To understand the full price of St. Nazaire, we must rewind the clock slightly. While the Campbeltown was ramming the dock, and the commandos were blowing up the pump houses, a separate, even more desperate battle was raging in the middle of the river, the Battle of the Little Ships. The Royal Navy had sent 16 motor launches into the estuary. Their job was to land commandos on the Old Mole and then withdraw the survivors. But they were unarmored. Against them were the coastal batteries of the Kriegsmarine. Within minutes of the Germans opening fire, the river became a slaughterhouse. These boats were carrying auxiliary fuel tanks on deck. When a German incendiary round hit them, they didn't just sink. They turned into floating crematoriums. But amidst this inferno, individual acts of heroism began to emerge that defy belief. This is the story of the Victoria Crosses. Commander Robert Ryder, the naval commander of the raid. His ship, MGB 314, is the command vessel. Unlike the others, he doesn't have troops to land. His job is to coordinate. But Ryder sees that the other boats are being decimated. He realizes the Campbeltown is stuck fast, but he needs to be sure the commandos have gotten off. Instead of retreating to the safety of the dark ocean, Ryder drives his boat into the center of the kill zone. He maneuvers MGB 314 right up to the burning Campbeltown. He parks his boat in the middle of a crossfire to check on his men. Satisfied that Beatty and his men are ashore, Ryder turns to leave, but he sees men in the water. Survivors from the burning launches. The river is full of sailors clinging to wreckage, calling out in the dark. Ryder stops. Under intense 80mm artillery fire from the shore batteries, he stops the boat. He rescues his men. For over an hour, Ryder keeps his station in the middle of the river, acting as a shield, a rescue boat, and a command post. His boat is riddled with holes, but he refuses to leave until every possible survivor is picked up. But Ryder serves as the brain of the withdrawal. The muscle is able seaman William Savage. William Savage is the gun layer on the forward 2-pounder gun. He has no shield. He is standing completely exposed on the open deck of a small boat. The German searchlights are fixed on him. He is the most visible target on the river, and he is absolutely lethal. Savage engages the German shore batteries one by one. He shoots out the searchlights. He suppresses the pillboxes. He is firing with such ferocity that the German gunners are forced to keep their heads down. He is the reason MGB 314 is still afloat. He is the reason they are able to pick up survivors. As Ryder finally turns the boat toward the sea, Savage does not take cover. He stays in the harness. He keeps firing, covering the retreat of the other surviving boats. Mile after mile, he silences a sniper tower. He destroys an artillery emplacement. They are almost out. They have run the gauntlet. The safety of the Atlantic is minutes away. And then, a stray fragment. Not a direct hit, just shrapnel from an airburst shell. Able Seaman Savage is killed instantly at his post. He dies with his finger on the trigger. He never saw the open ocean he fought so hard to reach. He was awarded the Victoria Cross posthumously. The citation read, "For great gallantry, skill, and devotion to duty, completely exposed and under heavy fire. He fought his gun with a courage that has no equal." Ryder makes it back to England. His boat is a sieve. It is filled with the dead and the dying. When he docks at Falmouth, the waiting admirals are horrified by the state of the vessel. It is a miracle it is floating. But not everyone is so lucky. The story of the withdrawal is mostly a story of loss. ML-177, carrying the wounded from the Campbeltown, is hit by a heavy shell. It breaks apart. Men who had survived the ramming, who had survived the demolition, are now floating in the freezing Atlantic, miles from home. The Germans send out torpedo boats at dawn to hunt them down. They pick up the survivors, but they also find the bodies. The tide carries the debris of the raid out to sea. Pith helmets, life jackets, pieces of the Campbeltown. The next morning, the propaganda war begins. The Germans claim a total victory. They claim they have crushed an invasion. They parade the prisoners through the streets. They photograph the wreckage. But their victory parade is cut short at 11:35 a.m. When the Campbeltown explodes, the propaganda narrative evaporates along with the dry dock. The world knows the truth. You can capture the men. You can sink the boats. But you cannot hide a mushroom cloud. The battle is over. The silence that follows is heavier than the shelling. Over 200 British commandos and sailors are now guests of the Third Reich. They sit in temporary cells waiting for their fate. They know the rumors. They know about Hitler's commando order. The order states that all Allied commandos captured in Europe and Africa should be executed immediately without trial. They are not to be treated as prisoners of war. They are to be treated as terrorists. Colonel Newman sits among his men. He knows this. He expects a firing squad at dawn. But something strange happens at St. Nazaire. The German soldiers who fought them, the men who manned the searchlights and the flak towers, they do not see terrorists, they see warriors. The ferocity of the raid has shocked the Wehrmacht. They cannot comprehend how men in wooden boats charged into the teeth of 80 guns. Respect, it seems, overrides the Führer's orders. Instead of a wall and a blindfold, they are given a funeral. It is one of the most surreal moments of the Second World War. The Germans organize a full military funeral for the British dead. Not a mass grave, a ceremony. German soldiers act as pallbearers. They drape the coffins in the Union Jack. They form an honor guard. The German commandant stands over the graves of the men who just destroyed his dry dock. He salutes and he speaks. They fought not for money, but for their country. They were the flower of the British Army. We pay tribute to their courage. It is a final fading echo of chivalry in a war that is becoming increasingly savage. The commandos are buried with full honors, and the survivors are shipped off to the POW camps. They are sent to Marlag und Milag Nord, a naval prisoner of war camp. For the next 3 years, this will be their home. But the war continues to be fought inside the interrogation rooms. The Germans are desperate to know, how did you do it? How did you bypass the radar? How did the ship explode? Commander Beatty is questioned repeatedly. The Germans are convinced the Campbeltown had a hidden crew, a suicide squad that stayed behind to light the fuse. They cannot believe a timer could work after such a collision. Beatty tells them nothing. He lets them believe in ghosts. He lets them believe that the British have technology far beyond German understanding. It is psychological warfare, and it works. Back in St. Nazaire, the Germans try to fix the dock. They bring in cranes. They bring in engineers. But the Campbeltown did her job too well. The caisson is pulverized. The pumping machinery, thanks to Lieutenant Chant, is a twisted heap of metal at the bottom of a pit. After months of effort, they give up. The Normandie dock is abandoned. The strategic ripple effect is immediate. Hitler is furious. He rages at his admirals. How could a handful of British gangsters cripple a fortress? He orders the coastal defenses of the Atlantic Wall to be tripled. This seems like a bad thing, but it is actually a victory for the Allies. Every bag of cement, every steel beam, every gun used to reinforce the ports is one less gun on the Eastern Front, is one less gun in Normandy. The raid on St. Nazaire forces Hitler to waste massive resources defending ports that the Allies never planned to attack again. It is the ultimate feint. The war ends in 1945. The prisoners come home. Newman and Beatty are reunited with the men they left on the burning dock. They are gaunt, they are scarred, but they are alive. The Victoria Crosses are awarded, but the men of St. Nazaire don't talk about medals. They talk about the ones who didn't come back. They talk about Able Seaman Savage on the gun. They talk about the boys who burned in the river. Decades later, the survivors return to France. They meet the German soldiers who fired at them. They walk the streets of the town they nearly destroyed. And they find something unexpected. The French have named streets after them. To the people of St. Nazaire, the raid was the first sign that the Nazi giant could bleed. It was the night hope returned to France. For the survivors of the beach, the battle ended at 1 p.m. on August 19th. But the war was far from over. Nearly 2,000 Canadians were marched into captivity. They were the men of Dieppe. For 3 long years, they existed in the twilight world of the Stalags. Stalag 8B, Lambsdorff, a place of barbed wire, turnip soup, and boredom. They were shackled, they were starved, but they were not broken. The Dieppe prisoners became legendary for their resistance. They dug tunnels, they sabotaged work details, They traded cigarettes for radio parts to listen to the BBC. They held on to the hope that one day the tables would turn. That day finally came in 1945. But it came with a final test. As the Soviet Red Army smashed through Poland, the Germans panicked. They emptied the POW camps. They forced the prisoners to march west, away from the liberators. The Death March in the dead of winter, 1945. For months, the men of Dieppe marched across Germany. They slept in barns, in ditches. In the snow, they ate frozen potatoes they dug from the fields. Those who fell out of line were shot. Those who couldn't walk were left behind. It was a test of endurance that stripped a man down to his very core. But they kept each other alive. They carried their wounded. They shared their last crusts of bread because they were a regiment. Liberation, when it came, was a blur of chocolate, cigarettes, and tears. But the return home was not the fairy tale they expected. They brought the war home with them. In 1946, there was no word for PTSD. They called it battle exhaustion, or nerves. Men who had survived the beach and the camps found themselves waking up screaming in the night. They couldn't hold down jobs. They drank to drown the sound of the MG-42s.